If we put spelling in the context of history and the history of the English language, a lot of those spelling rules, spelling patterns, which are very, very difficult for lots of learners, suddenly there is a reason for it.
For dyslexic learners bewildered by different spelling rules, a knowledge of how language has evolved can not only help them understand, it can eventually lead to a love of language and how it's used. Useful resources for this session might include some timeline tiles representing key periods of English history, cards showing words with different historical origins, and you could do some research on the origins of the student's name. There are numerous websites that can help with this. The session can start with the pupil being asked to use the timeline cards to put the periods of English history in chronological order. Having a visual representation that they've created themselves is a helpful reference point for the dyslexic learner.
I think it's a really important method, particularly for our older learners, because generally dyslexic learners become very bewildered by different spelling patterns, different spelling rules that don't seem to make sense. But if they can actually look at a timeline of the English language and see all the influences that have affected the English language and brought about rules and spelling patterns, it has meaning for them. What jumps out at you in this particular timeline, if we're looking at the history of the English language? Are there any milestones that you're interested in or that jump out at you, if we're thinking about it in terms of language? We need to look at the influences on the English language. We can do this quite easily by looking at all the different countries which invaded England and brought their languages to us. Also, it's changing all the while. Even now with the technological revolution, we've got new words, new acronyms, text-speak. So language is always evolving, and what I want to show our learners is that actually there is a reason for every spelling pattern, a reason for every spelling rule, if we look at the word in context of the influences on our language across the years. What I've done is I've actually found your family name and your family crest, and here you can see that actually the first recordings date from the Norman period.
A next step can be to get the learner to look at the derivation of their own name. It's a good way of showing that a word they're very familiar with can have an interesting history.
Okay.
So your actual name is really rooted in the Norman period.
Oh, wow.
Then the learner can start to look at other words and can try to work out which period of history they originated from.
Brilliant, well done.
This can even take the form of a game of timeline snap.
And when we have two pictures that match, we say snap. But it may be that we get to a word. And when we get to a word like the word treasure, for example, you will say the word treasure and then you will spell the word as you place your cards down. So, for example, you will turn over treasure and then you go treasure and then go T-R-E-A-S-U-R-E. Yeah, and then once you've spelt it correctly, you can take the pile away.
Okay.
The idea of doing that is that you're seeing the word, you're saying the word, you're saying the letter names, which is really important because, as you know, not all words can be sounded out. And the movement of actually placing the cards on the table is sort of helping to secure it in your memory. I would probably start to teach the derivation of words and later root words and prefix and suffix components, probably to learners from the year 4 or 5 and upward. And often you find that by the time learners have reached senior school, they've had so many lessons in phonics, and often all the rules and regulations and letter sounds and phonemes are very abstract to them. They find it very, very difficult unless it's memorable to hold on to those letter sounds. But if they can take meaning from the word itself and understand where it came from, it actually widens their vocabulary, and it helps learners to create new words.
The learner can also be encouraged to create their own word cards. A collection of words that they've studied and conquered is a useful memory tool.
The imagination is the key to learning. If you notice, a lot of my resources are very visual. I have pictures, they're very hands-on, so that they engage the learner at all times. Okay, so thanks, Alice. You've worked really hard today, and thanks for, I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, I did, thank you.
Here's your spelling card.
Thank you.
We shall put that on a key ring, and that's hopefully going to be one of the first spellings that we'll be learning. Hopefully we'll learn across the timeline.
That's great, thank you very much.
That's okay.
Thank you.
So to recap the main points of teaching the derivation of language. Make a chronological timeline of English history. Engage the learner by looking at the history of his or her name. Match other words to their historical period. Make memory cards of the words studied. The learner can keep them on a key ring.